Alright guys, welcome back to another adventure. This week I have made up these plans for wee Tatooine based desert houses. I do make a few changes to them along the way, but if anybody wants these I'll figure out a way to let people have them. To make the houses I started by carefully cutting out the pieces with my fancy new alpha knife, then tracing the sections out onto foam core. I like to trace them butted up to each other to save waste, and I'm proper lazy, so it saves me making cuts so I don't have to. Now it's time to cut all the pieces. And this is why we use a ruler. Look at how easy it is to cut things out when they're all butted up to each other, so much efficiency. I like to use this high-tack PVA glue to stick things together. It dries a little bit faster, but it holds almost instantly. So I glued 3 of the sides on first, before I stuck on the roof. It's much easier to stick in the roof before you glue on the final side and seal the whole thing up. I decided that the buttresses on the plans were a bit too short. In reality they wouldn't hold up shit, so I marked up sections of foam core 1 centimetre wide. Just look at that speed. Then I chopped out 16 sections because we're going to double these up to get some extra thickness. So I glued all the pieces into double thickness buttresses and set them aside to dry. Then set about marking up the locations for the buttresses from the plans onto the main build. I also marked up the location of the door frame. While other things are drying, it's time to sort out the door, so I cut out the main outline from the plans, then traced around this onto the foam core twice, because again this is going to get doubled up. I also cut out the centre of the template, then traced this onto the foam core as well. Now it's time to cut it out. The way I like to do curves is lots of little slices at tangents to the curve, and eventually they smooth out and make it a nice round surface. Then I used a smaller knife to cut out the centre section of the frame. Probably should have used a scalpel, it would have made a lot nicer cut. And now for more gluing to get the frame thickness. Finally, the buttresses are dry and we can use the 45-degree line on the cutting board to slice a wee angle on the top. Then, using the lines we marked earlier, we can start making this thing look a lot better and glue on our buttresses where they need to go. Once the door's dried and ready to go, we can stick that on as well. I found some 8cm semi-spheres in the wee man's craft box, so I stole them. He's 4, he's not going to notice they're missing. So I glued these onto the roof to make the building look a little bit more Tatooine-y. That horrible thing at the top there was a test piece I made at the same time as this one. I tried to use coffee for the texture, but that didn't work well at all. To make the doors, I took one of the cutouts from the door frame and chopped it in half down the centre. Then I used a dull pencil to sketch in a rough Star Warsy design onto the door, and then used the side of the pencil to scribble the background into nothingness and create a bit of depth to the design. I glued these in position, but later on decided they were a bit shit and ripped them off and did it again off camera. It wouldn't really be a big adventures video if I didn't fuck something up along the way. So here's the first one. I thought it would be a great idea to use the Geek Gaming Scenics modelling compound to create the texture on the house. This was a stupid idea. The modelling compound's too thick and it dries far too fast to actually be of any use for this, and I felt a bit like a tit. So I stopped and had some juice and contemplated my life choices, and then ripped it all off. Thankfully I was pointed in the right direction of using Ready Mix wall filler instead. Since this is basically just plaster, it can create the texture without being too thick and will add a shitload of strength to the piece. So this got slathered over the whole thing and smoothed out a little bit where it needed. I did this on both houses and then set it aside to dry for a day. I wanted to try something different to the usual acrylic paints, so I picked out these emulsion testers from B&Q and Wix for about £1.50 each to see if they will work just as well. I painted two different versions, the first one being a sandstone type colour and the second being more stone-like. Downside to these paints is the drying time. These take about 4 hours between coats and about 24 hours before you can use any sort of wash on them. I moved on to stippling my mid-tone all over the model, trying to leave a good amount of the base coat showing through, and then followed that on with a lighter stippling of the highlight colour. I do love my stippling. I tried to keep this layer as light as possible. This is where things went a bit on the wrong side again. I thought using my homemade brown wash would be a great idea. It wasn't. It went horribly. It made everything far too dark and it couldn't be recovered without painting the whole thing again. I also tried using a paper towel to soak up the excess and lighten things a little bit, but all that did was smudge the paint underneath. So once it was dry, I just repainted it with the original stone colours. For the second attempt at weathering, I decided to go with some AK Interactive Streaking Grime instead. So I heavily splodged this in all the recesses, and I also added a small amount of the grime to the bottom, around about a centimetre up all the way around. Once that was starting to dry a little bit, I took a big slightly damp brush and started to smudge and blend the streaking grime for a little bit more realism, and to make it look a little less deliberate. And this is what you end up with. You ready for the big reveal? You'll notice that the stone coloured building on the right has a slightly different scheme. For this one I used flesh shade in the same way that I used the streaking grime, but I didn't really like the result. I'm still not overly happy with the doors either, so they might get changed at a later date, maybe with some UV resin casting. But you'll just have to subscribe so you can see if that ever happens. Catch you on the next one, guys.